Hey, namaste, good morning. Shakti here and back for day 5 of my road to Rapture. So I've been rushing to get here this morning. It's been harder and harder each morning to show up at 9 o'clock, but I'm determined to be on time. So hey and welcome. I am Shakti. Oh, I've got a croaky voice still after having COVID. Kind of like it, but yeah, so I'm Shakti. I am a priestess of love and sacred sexuality. I teach embodied awareness and sexual and spiritual awakening for women, and I've been doing this work for 18 years. My book, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women, is coming out on Amazon on October the 9th. And the course that I teach that goes along with that book is coming up for its 3rd live round on October the 28th. I'll put the information for that below if you want to know more. I also work one-to-one with women around this issue, not an issue, but around this whole topic of awakening to your fullest sexual, spiritual potential in the world. So welcome. We're at the end of the first week of lives. I'm doing lives for the next 2 weeks. So it's 3 whole weeks of lives leading up to the book launch event on Saturday, the October the 9th. And this whole week has been about really kind of setting the scene, looking at the seeds in my own life for what was to become a complete change in direction. In terms of what I do and who I am and my calling in the world. So everything I've been sharing has been about those seeds, and also not just for this change in my direction towards rapture, but also the seeds for my becoming a writer, right? Because writing has always been such a huge part of my life as well. So next week I'm going to speak to the beginning of writing the book and the next stage of my own sexual awakening journey. So today's theme is called the second rupture, not the rapture, the rupture. So they kind of, for my life anyway, they've gone together. Like there's been a rupture which has created catalyzed me towards the path of my rapture. So this second rupture, sex and motherhood. And I call this the second rupture because for me, the first one you'll have heard about if you listen to the first and second lives especially. The first rupture happened in menarche when I began to bleed and entered into puberty from a very idyllic childhood. Suddenly everything in my world changed and I was part of this patriarchal religious system. So that was kind of the macro for what I call the split in my psyche and in my being between sort of creating this dualistic way of thinking and being in my own body and psyche. So on the macro level, living in this very patriarchal culture and society, being religious, being a Christian, very dualistic way of thinking and conceiving of sex and spirit and the body, of feminine, masculine, the virgin and the whore split, you know, totally embodied it all. And on the micro level, my parents were embodying those like really extreme polarities of the shadow masculine and the shadow feminine, you know, the victim and the perpetrator, the dominator, the bully, and the disempowered victim feminine, right? So that was micro and macro, the split in my life embodied in me. The second rupture for me came during motherhood. Although there were many other ruptures actually, you know, I've also been sharing about betrayal, mine and then towards me, and you know, those experiences, all of those ruptures, all of those creating little seeds for my eventual shifting of life path and awakening. The other thing I also want to say is that when you see this title and it includes the word motherhood, I imagine that for some people that might be a turn-off, or you might think, oh, this is going to be boring, maybe. But you know what? This is such a huge, huge, huge and most important topic for so many people, because when a woman goes through the physiological, psychological, and emotional and spiritual changes of becoming a mother, of course, it hugely affects her relationship with her body, her relationship with her sexuality, and her relationship with her partner if she has one, right? And I don't feel that this is talked about enough with any level of conscious awareness. But of course, it's an immense initiation. It's an immense life change. And based on my own experience and what I see, and based on the testimonies of the women that I work with, I feel like this is something we all need to bring so much more awareness to. Unfortunately, I didn't have that awareness at the time. You know, I feel like I have it more now, but I didn't have it then. And I suffered. And my husband suffered. But of course, on the other hand, that is what propelled me onto this path. The other thing I want to say, and I keep saying this, and I feel like I can't say it enough, is that, again, this I really want to highlight how sexuality for a woman is not just about a physical act happening at a particular moment in time between two people. A woman's sexuality affects her whole life and is affected by her whole life, her whole being, and her whole sexual life cycle. It is all directly interrelated and connected. So from menarche, when she begins to bleed, through to masturbation, through to first sexual experiences, through to relationship, through to her first experiences of orgasm, through to marriage or partnership or committed relationship or other forms of relationship, or marriage, if that has happened, through to pregnancy, miscarriage, abortion, motherhood, birthing, the experience of birthing, the experience of lactating, the experience of parenting, the experience of perimenopause, being a maga, which is the maga phase of the cycle of womanhood, is she who is in menopause or perimenopause but still parenting. You know, I was in that phase for quite a while, through to menopause, through to cronehood. These aspects on the life cycle of a woman are not separate from her sexuality. They directly relate to it. And if she is conscious of that cycle of her womanhood, then she can mine and access her inner wisdom, her inner authority, her inner power, her spiritual and psychic and embodied gifts, right? If we navigate that cycle of our lives and our sexualities unfolding consciously, then that is where our power, authority, sovereignty, pleasure, true feminine essence and awakening lies. If we don't, then you have the kind of experiences that I had and that a lot of other people are still having. And I just want to recommend a really great book for understanding this. It's a huge book. It's a book called Yoni Shakti, A Woman's Guide to Power and Freedom Through Yoga and Tantra by Uma Dinsmore-Tuli. It's an incredible book. It's a great resource for any woman who wants to understand how and why her whole sexual life cycle is related to her power and freedom. Okay, so let's continue with my story. And I just also want to say, one of the reasons that I'm willing to share so openly and so vulnerably from my own experience is that I feel in doing so, you get to see these threads, these archetypal themes, these threads. You get to see a direct example of what did and didn't work and why. You know, you get to see your own shadows through me exposing mine. You get to see the potential through me revealing mine and how it unfolded, right? So, picking up from where I left off yesterday, I had been betrayed. So there I was, devastated. So I'm going to sort of skip through to get to the motherhood part, but very briefly, I started to study for a PhD in social anthropology at SOAS. Well, I did my master's first, got a distinction. And one interesting part about that was that was the very first time that I studied gender. So gender studies was part of my master's and part of my PhD. And it was a massive revelation for me to read feminist theory, postmodern theory. Connection just went off for a minute there. It was this massive explosion of, just want to check I'm still connected. Sorry, the connection was just going a few times there. For me, this was the massive explosion of new insight, new awareness to look back on my life and my mother's life and society, and begin to see it with a more critical eye and with a more witnessing consciousness, right? It was one of them, like that, when I did my master's in social anthropology, was one of the best years of my whole life. I loved it. So as I was studying for my PhD, I went to the States to study Burmese for the summer, because I was doing my PhD on Burma, or Myanmar. And there I met a man who was highly intelligent, the brightest man in the room, the brightest person in the room, very witty, very athletic, wild, 7 years my junior, and he was also studying for his PhD, and he was also studying Burmese language. We became lovers, and it was very passionate, it was very exciting. You know, all the things that attract me in a person were there: intellectual, sexual, athletic, humor, wild and adventurous. My biological clock was ticking, and we dated long distance for 3 years between LA and London, both doing our PhDs. It felt very exciting. And then this urge to nest and to procreate became stronger and stronger in me. So to cut a long story short, I left London, I moved to the US, and we got married in a drive-through in Las Vegas. Again, wild, adventurous, sexy, passionate, right? And from then on, basically, as we started our lives together, I wanted to conceive very, very strongly. And I can really speak now from experience, like I hadn't known that feeling until sort of my 30s, really. Like, you know, when my sharings earlier, when I was in my 20s, I had no desire to have children at all. But that was also very much about the guy that I was with. I kind of didn't want his children, you know. So then, though, this surge of desire to have a child overtook me. And I know, sort of very much, again, looking back, it was as if my ovaries chose this man, you know, to sort of bring together our mutual gifts, our mutual intellect, our mutual athleticism, you know, our mutual desire for growth, and all the rest of it. So making love with the desire to procreate, I discovered, was a very different experience to making love to just have pleasure. It's not that it wasn't pleasurable. Actually, I found it even more exciting and even more pleasurable to be making love with that freedom of no concern about whether I was going to get pregnant or not. You know, that was gone, so that it was so liberating to have that freedom and to be making love, with passion, with excitement. It was just, you know, a wonderful, wonderful experience. We didn't do anything, even though I was 36, in terms of trying to plan things. I had a very, very irregular cycle, so I never looked at my cycle. I never analyzed where I was. I couldn't really anyway, because it was so irregular. And I conceived very, very easily, in that passion, in that love, in that literal calling in of a new soul into my body and my being. Like, I really felt that sense of inviting life into my body and into my womb. So that was really exciting times. I got pregnant and I loved it. I loved my breasts growing. I've never had big breasts, so I loved having boobs. I loved the expansion of my belly. I loved all of it. It was just delicious to feel myself growing and blossoming with this new life. I loved it. And our sex life continued being brilliant throughout pregnancy, you know. No reason for it not to be. It felt very luscious. There was one thing though. I was living in the States, and part of the medical system there, very fortunately, we had free healthcare through my husband's job. And at that point, I was still very unconscious, and I was just going along with the programmed routine checkups. So I was termed a geriatric pregnancy because I was 36. And I was termed a high-risk pregnancy for various reasons. So I had to go in for loads of checkups and loads of scans. And I just kind of went along with it all, just trusting the doctors, trusting what I was told to do, just following along blindly, not really questioning too much, you know. That's how I'd been conditioned to be a submissive, willing participant in the system, and really not to question it. So I went along with it all. I didn't really educate or inform myself too much. I take full responsibility for that. And then came the fated day, you know. I went into labor. And by the way, I was absolutely massive. Like, I wasn't fat. I've got, if you don't know me, I've got quite a small physical frame. But my belly was huge. I went into labor. We went into hospital because my contractions were coming closer together, and that's what they tell you to do. And I just knew it was time. I just knew, like, you know your body, don't you? So when I got to hospital, I was told that I was exaggerating the levels of pain. I was told that I was barely dilated, and I was told that because my waters hadn't broken, for those 3 reasons, they could not admit me to the birthing suite. And I was like, yeah, but I'm in labor. And they're like, no, you're not. And I was like, yeah, I'm in labor. And they're like, no, you're not. Go home and continue laboring. We can't admit you. I later found out that, as was the case for me in both my pregnancies, that some women, I later found out that some women, their waters never break all the way through pregnancy. But I didn't know that was possible at the time. I had no idea. I just trusted what they told me. But for me, in both my pregnancies, as I later discovered, my waters never broke. They had to be popped. And even that, I discovered later on, isn't necessary. But I didn't know that. So I refused to leave because I felt so certain that I was quite close to not giving birth, but I felt that my labor was very much in progress. So what I did, or what they told me to do, was to go out into the corridor or the canteen. Now, for any woman who's been in labor, just imagine you're in labor and you're told to go and walk along a corridor or walk around a canteen. Now, if for a man who's watching, you might not understand this, but when you're in labor, any bright light, any noise, any disruption, any other people is really, really distressing and disruptive to the process of birthing, right? So I was walking along the corridor in labor, in a lot of pain and discomfort, with people walking past me, doctors and nurses walking past me, things going on, bright strip lights above me, like the most horrendous environment for laboring. About an hour later, or an hour and a half later, no more than that, I was on my hands and knees being sick, vomiting all over the floor. And I was so out of it, I didn't realize I was right by where the elevators were in the hospital where everyone was coming up towards the maternity unit. A doctor spotted me and took me in to the labour ward. They examined me and I was 6 centimetres dilated. So in an hour and a half, I'd gone from nothing to 6.5 centimetres. That's really fast. And that's almost coming to transition period, which is the most distressing and most difficult point of labouring, right? I had nobody with me to support me, no family members. My family were all in the UK. I had no midwife, I had no nurse. My husband was useless, if I'm just being honest. As you know, he just wasn't able to stand up for, or advocate, or support me in the way that I needed. So there I was, very distressed, in a lot of pain and discomfort. And I was at that point then just screaming, give me an epidural. And of course, in America, that's what they love to do. I can't remember the exact percentage, but a very, very high number of births happen with an epidural in America. So what happened then? The whole natural process of birthing pretty much stopped, slowed way down. And to cut that very long story short, I ended up giving birth hours later, hours and hours and hours later, on my back, feeling nothing, with the baby slightly in distress by that point. In the process of that, my vagina tore internally and lots of hemorrhoids coming out with the baby, which again, people don't tell you about. But ladies and gents, if you've not given birth, that's part of giving birth. But it's obviously made worse if you're lying on your back and being told to push. So that was very traumatic and difficult. And then the baby was there and I was in bliss. I loved being a mum. I loved my baby instantly. I loved lactating, nursing, being a mum. I just loved it. And you know, all the stuff that I'd learned in gender studies and feminism, it went out the window. I had been this dedicated career woman, you know, intent on my business career and then intent on getting my PhD. It all went out the window. I was utterly in love with my baby and all I wanted to do was to be a mum. The instinct was so strong to just love, to nurture, to nurse, to take care, to parent, to want to be there for him. I didn't want anybody else to take care of him. I wanted to take care of him. So this instinct just came in and came online. And so that was all beautiful. And of course, you're told 6 weeks, you can't have sex for 6 weeks to allow the vagina to heal, particularly if there's been any trauma, so any tearing, which again, I didn't know happened. I didn't know that happened. I had no idea that could even happen. That's how naive and uninformed I was. And after 6 weeks, well, less than 6 weeks, my husband basically was lying in bed with me with a massive hard-on. And we tried to make love, and it was agonizing. It was really painful and uncomfortable. And I was so upset. Because, you know, we'd had a great sex life. I love sex. And it was painful. It hurt a lot. It was really distressing. We didn't really talk about it, but the dynamic was then him coming at me with his hard-on and me pushing him away because I didn't want to experience that pain. Neither of us had the awareness, the self-awareness, the communication skills to talk about it. Again, looking back with hindsight, knowing what I know now, being who I am now, it would have been very different, but I didn't have the capacity, I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the self-awareness at that time in my life, and neither did he. It's very sad, you know, it's very sad looking back that, again, through our mutual conditioning, through my conditioning, through cultural conditioning, through societal conditioning. There was such a blindness and such a helplessness and such, again, the overlay around this whole area of shame, of secrecy, of fear, of withholding, of not knowing how to tackle something so delicate, so painful, and so touching upon, some of our most primitive needs, both our desire, our kind of sexual instincts, but also the need for emotional intimacy and for holding and for connection and for being understood, And I'm sure so many people who've been through this can relate to what I'm saying, even if your story is not exactly the same. When a woman becomes a mother, it changes so much about her sexuality and the relationship. And if we don't have that awareness, it can really create distance and division and resentment and misunderstandings and separation. So, just checking the time and checking my notes. I don't want to speak for too long, but I know it's really, what I'm saying is actually really important. If I look back now, I can see, because I can be honest with myself now in a way that I couldn't be then, that at times I used my baby as a shield from facing this issue between us, and as a way of avoiding confrontation or just discussion about what was happening. I can see now that I was doing that. It was easy to do that because, of course, a baby is demanding, an infant is demanding, but there were times when I used my child as an excuse not to communicate or not to face what was happening. And he was equally avoiding in his own way. So both of us were avoiding facing this kind of elephant in the room. And again, not because we're bad people, just because we didn't know any better, and we were very unconscious and unaware, and kind of programmed to kind of be disempowered in a way and be dishonest in a way. Not as bad people, but just that's what the programming is. So we buried our truths, and we carried on in the groove of married life and parenting, which to the outside looked really happy and great, And then 6 months later, my husband went away for work for, I think it was 6 weeks. And when he came back, I knew something was different. He never said, but I got it out of him. He had slept with somebody else. And when I heard that information, it was like a shutter came down inside me. And everything just shut down. Everything just shut down. Whew. Yeah, everything shut down. Now, I'm not saying this to blame him. Looking back, it's very, very easy to see both our parts in this, right? And it's very sad. And I know that this plays out in many marriages, in many partnerships, when a child comes along in some way, in some form, and that's why I'm willing to be so honest about it. We had sex 1 or 2 more times. One of those times, my daughter was conceived. So I had the blessing of 2 children conceived in passion and love. And the second time around, I was informed, I was more aware, I was more in tune. I birthed naturally. I birthed as a very empowered woman. And actually, that second birthing experience was the first time in my life that I felt a connection to some kind of transpersonal power that was surging through me that I would later recognize as the energy of Kali. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but when I then came on to experience Kali's energy more in my being and my body, my life, I was like, aha, that's what it was when I gave birth to my daughter. So it was a very different, very empowering, very strong, very full-on, beautiful experience. So there was that healing that happened for me and that empowered shift that happened for me. But basically from then on, my husband and I didn't have sex. Didn't have sex for 4.5 years. I did go to a gynecologist, by the way, about the pain. And it was a woman in the system. She examined me. She was like, can't see anything too much. You have to use it or lose it. That was all she said. You have to use it or lose it. She gave me some antidepressants. I wasn't depressed. I was experiencing pain in my vagina when we were trying to have sex. She gave me antidepressants. I tried them for a few days. They made me feel so spaced out. I hated it. I threw them away. That was the support that the system was willing to give me. That was the degree to which the system does not understand a woman's psyche, a woman's body, a woman's sexuality. That was, for me, a turning point, an awakening, as it were, to recognizing that the medical system out there does not understand, empathize with, is not based upon a knowing, A, of the holistic nature of our bodies and our well-being, and B, has no understanding really of a woman's sexuality, embodiment, and doesn't trust the voice of the patient. It's very patriarchal. They think they know better. They don't. They think they're doing what's for our best, and it's not. So that recognition right back then, I'm using now when I see what's going on with COVID. It directly relates for me. The other thing that I recognize now looking back is that how entrenched I still was in the disempowered conditioning of the patriarchal system, how I was still in the first birthing experience just blindly going along with what everybody else did without questioning it, how I was still in my first birthing experience disconnected from my own power, my own authority, my own voice, my own body, my own wisdom. As a woman, the wisdom that we can access only comes, no, I'm never going to say only isn't true, comes primarily through the body, through deep connection with the physical body, with the root, with the sex, with the womb, with the heart, with the belly, with the breasts. This is where our wisdom is encoded in and through the body, not here in the mind. I was still divorced from that wisdom in my own being. Blindly trusting, blindly submitting to so-called experts, to so-called authorities, when I was the expert, I was the authority, I knew what was happening in my body. They didn't listen, I knew. So that's why I don't blindly trust and follow what so-called medical experts are saying now without first questioning and feeling in my body, does this feel true? Does this resonate? Does this feel aligned for me? Does this feel right? Because they don't know everything. Their model is very disconnected, dissociated, divided, separated, dualistic, and split. And the other point I want to reflect back for me and for everyone watching is that in my marriage, we didn't and couldn't resolve what was going on with our sex life and our relationship, because basically what ended up happening is we carried on living as a happily married couple not having sex, living our two separate lives in parallel, but really missing out on the potential that could have been there to return to a different, new, great sex life, and missing the potential for mutual support and mutual intimacy. Why was this? We both lacked the self-awareness, we both lacked the honesty, we both lacked the communication skills, and we both were avoiding the discomfort of having that discussion and confrontation. We were both too scared of it, I guess. Well, I can't speak for him. I wish I had known what I know now, what I had to go and find out and learn myself. I wish we were taught these things when we were young, when we go into puberty. I wish we were taught about our sexuality, about conscious communication, about relating, authentic relating. I wish I'd known all these things that nobody showed me, nobody taught me. Our society doesn't. And again, I just want to emphasize how sexuality is never just an act between two people that happens in a moment for pleasure. It will always be connected to everything that's going on in your psyche, in your emotions, in your fears, in your traumas, in your wounds, in your resentments, in your needs for closeness and intimacy, in your projections, in your libido, in your conscious and your unconscious. It's all connected. It's not separate. I could have opened. This is the sad, sad thing. If my husband had known how to approach me with tenderness, with care, with listening, without basically just coming at me with a hard-on. If the approach had been to just listen to how I was feeling, to just stroke my aching body without a desire to get to arouse me to have sex, I could have opened to him. This is the sad thing, because I needed that tenderness to be able to open. And in the same way, if I had been able to articulate from my heart how I was feeling and what I needed, maybe I could have touched his heart and we could have returned to the closeness that we'd known before. And this is basically taking some of the fundamental principles of what I teach now and what Tantra is about. Speaking from the heart. The feminine speaks from the heart to her masculine counterpart. When the feminine speaks from her heart, he can hear and respond. If I had had the capacity to understand that I was nursing a huge amount of resentment towards my husband for not supporting me during labor, if I'd have been able to see and acknowledge that, that could have shifted things, but I wasn't able to. If I had been able to allow myself to really go into feeling the grief that I felt over the lack of sex and the lack of intimacy and connection in our marriage, that could have shifted things. But I cut myself off from it. If he had been able to be honest with himself and voice to me his desire for intimacy, because for a lot of guys, the feeling of intimacy comes through sexuality. So ultimately, we wanted the same things, but we weren't able to speak about it. Heart and sex connected. So those were some of my lessons from that time. Sadly, we never found a way to resolve our differences and to communicate. And my life was beginning to go in a different direction. I had by then trained to become a teacher of conscious dance. So a complete and very radical shift from being a businesswoman and an academic. I was now a teacher of a conscious dance practice called the Nia technique. And this was already creating the opening that had enabled me to become an empowered birth mother the second time around. This conscious dance practice encapsulated the integrated modalities of martial arts, healing arts, dance arts, energy, chakras, body, mind, emotion, spirit integration, yoga, and so embodied awareness. So this was then becoming my new reality. And so my life was turning in a different direction. And also I was beginning to feel very stifled by living in an American suburbia. Remember what I referred to in the live on mating in captivity, that sense of freedom and domesticity, the dualistic or the paradox, the conflict that is there within all of us between the need for stability and security and nesting and the desire for freedom and expansion and adventure. Well, I was beginning to feel that restriction of suburbia, and again this feeling of like the rest of my life cannot just be this domestic track. I want more than this. I need more than this. There has to be more than just being a mum and a housewife and a wife in suburbia for the rest of my life. So that change was happening in me, and so we separated. I moved back to London. That was very exciting, but I came back as a single mum to a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, a girl and a boy, with having lost connection with all my old friends because I'd been away for 6 years, and no money, no job, nothing to my name. So that was the beginning of another huge turning on this journey that I've been on. Going to end things there today. Got a little bit longer than I wanted to again. But I feel like what I've shared is really important. Things that are really important to talk about, you know. Marriage, motherhood, the changes, all of this. If what I've shared has touched you in a way that you feel you might need some support, I now work deeply on a one-to-one basis with women around these kinds of issues. My Rapture course, where's my book, that goes hand in hand with the book, will also take you on a very deep exploration, resolution, healing, and empowerment around these kinds of issues. And the course is launching live for the 3rd time on October the 28th. And the book, which has a lot of practical exercises in it, by the way, each chapter has, I don't think I've ever said this yet, each chapter at the back of the book, at the back of each chapter, you have a movement practice, a meditation practice, and what I call an enjoyment, which is a little bit of homework. So it's a very practical guide. It's not just theory. It's very experiential. The book is going live for sale on October the 9th, and I'm doing a whole day launch event on October the 9th. And there's a book launch group you can join to be a part of that. So thank you once again for keeping me company, for listening, for watching, for supporting. You know, I really feel again the sort of the tenderness and the vulnerability in my heart as I share. And I'm trusting that whatever I've shared is reaching and will reach the right people and cause ripples for positive change and positive self-awareness and for positive awakenings, so that our world, our relationships, and our own relationship with ourselves can become more whole, more integrated, more aligned with truth and with love. And that we can return to the knowing of our innate power, our innate wisdom, and our innate ecstatic potential. Lots of love to you, gratitude, and I will see you on Monday. So no lives on Saturday and Sunday. I'll see you on Monday when we go into the next phase of my 2nd sexual awakening. Namaste.